BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Thursday, another Dahlia Thursday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Thursdays, I talk to you guys about the Black Dahlia murder. The murder of Elizabeth Short from 1947, one of the most horrific crimes in American history. And in this episode, I will be looking at Walter Bayley as a suspect in her murder, as well as responding to the interview from Eli Frankel on Crawlspace, where he was promoting his new book, Sisters in Death. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Black Dahlia. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. So I am going to be discussing Walter Bayley as a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder, and to those of you who have been following this segment here, Dahlia Thursday, you will know that I've been going through a lot of the Larry Harnish videos, but I'm also going to make an effort to look at other sources. That's one of the reasons for responding to the Eli Frankel video later. But I finally got to Larry Harnish discussing a suspect that he had thought of favorably in the past, and this is one that has received an enormous amount of criticism. Elizabeth Short was found dead in Southern California on January 15th of 1947. She had been cut in half, she had been mutilated extensively, and also beaten and bludgeoned extensively. So it is one of the most gruesome crimes in American history, and Walter Bayley is someone who lived in the vicinity, but he was actually a rather new resident to that part of Los Angeles, and there actually is an obituary that was posted for him on findagrave.com. And firstly, one thing, and I'm gonna be very honest with you guys, the real reason why I decided to make this episode for Dahlia Thursday this week is I think that Walter Bayley is actually going to go against a lot of the other profiling observations that have been made by other people. This is just his basic information. Dr. Walter Alonzo Bayley, Bayley spelled B-A-Y-L-E-Y, was born on March 25th of 1880 in El Dorado County, California. Now, born in 1880, it's quite shocking to think of a Black Dahlia murder suspect also being alive at the same time as Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper, of course, committed his crimes in 1888, and Walter Bayley was also alive at the time of the Midnight Assassin murders in 1884 and 1885. So he is considerably older, and he passed away on January 4th of 1948, roughly 1 year after the murder of Elizabeth Short. He was 67 years old when he passed away. If his birthday was on March 25th, he was also 60. He would have been 66 years old, just shy of his 67th birthday, when the Black Dahlia murder took place. Very, very old compared to a lot of the other suspects who were in their 20s and 30s. Now, being age 66, 67, that doesn't immediately rule somebody out, but is something that we do have to bear in mind. Let's hear a little bit more information about Walter Bayley. As previously stated, there is this obituary right here, and he was married on July 27th of 1907 in Los Angeles County. Dr. Walter Bayley was a 1905 graduate and associate professor of surgery at the University of Southern California and chief of staff at the Los Angeles County Hospital. He also maintained a private practice at the Professional Building 1052 West 6th Street, Los Angeles, specializing in women's surgical procedures and treatments. Okay, so even though he's considerably older than a lot of the suspects that will be discussed in the Black Dahlia case, I am seeing certain reasons about why people would suspect him. I mean, a doctor specializing in women's issues, as well as somebody with surgical capabilities. And it's really the surgical education. And yes, going back to Steve Hodel, that is his observation, that it doesn't necessarily mean that the Black Dahlia murderer was a surgeon full-time. It's that he had some type of education in surgery, but I'm definitely going to provide some counterbalance later on. The 1910 Bayley family were living at the coal mining town of Dawson, New Mexico, which was owned and operated by the Phelps Dodge Corporation. Walter was employed as a surgeon. He enlisted with the United States Marine Corps on April 23rd of 1918 and served during World War I with the rank of private and honorably discharged on July 24th, 1919 as a captain. The family resided on 48th Street in Los Angeles, and he had one son named Walter Prescott Bayley, who was killed in a truck accident in 1920. And they resided at 4546 Circle Boulevard from about 1935 to 1942, and their last known address was 3959 South Norton Avenue in Lambert Park, Los Angeles. And that is the general vicinity in which Elizabeth Short's body was dumped and discarded. And this is something that also Larry Harnish wanted to pay attention to very closely. Shortly before her murder, he moves to this place that is very close to the dump site. So you have a medical doctor in the area who is a surgeon, who has spent part of his career as a surgeon, as also specializing in women's health issues, and this seems like something that could be worthy of consideration. I would not dismiss him because of his age immediately. And also, here's something else. Dr. Walter Bayley separated from his wife in October of 1946. On December 22nd of 1947, he executed a new will disinheriting her by leaving half of his estate to a woman named Dr. Alexandra Patrica, his alleged mistress of 5 years. And, all right, so, more importantly, the mistress thing we can talk about for that for a second. It seems like he very clearly had an affair, but he has separated with his wife about, October of 1946. How many months is that going to be? About 4 or 5 months before the Black Dahlia murder? And people do commit crimes when there are stressors in their lives, and stressors do not necessarily have to be traumatic experiences. It can even be an uplifting experience. When there is a certain type of emotional connection that people have to an event, let's say a divorce, then they tend to also experience new things. And this can also include criminal behavior and deviant behavior. Was this somebody who recently got divorced? And did he have some type of relationship with Elizabeth Short? And also, did he plan this thing very methodically? Was he an older man at the end of his life, and he's beginning to think, I'm not going to be around forever. I have had this fantasy for a very long time about doing something to a woman, and Elizabeth Short was the opportune victim. So I think that those are all things to keep in mind, and they're things to discuss. So far, I really just want to begin with something, because as a suspect in this case, I do respect Larry Harnish's opinion. I can tell that he is a real Black Dahlia researcher. He has spent 3 decades on this case. And, if you put Dr. Walter Bayley into Google, you might see that he was not listed as an official Black Dahlia suspect, but I don't care about that. Anybody can find their own suspect. My challenge question to you is, do you think that Walter Bayley should be eliminated or excluded based on his age? 66 years old at the time. Do you think that he is too old for a Black Dahlia suspect? And the reason why I'm focusing on this is there have been other psychological profiles that have been created that veer toward a younger person. One set of Black Dahlia videos that I watched prior to the start of Dahlia Thursday was on the Citizen Detective podcast, and I'm definitely going to rewatch them again because one of the participants of that program was Dr. Lee Meller, who created his own profile for the Black Dahlia Avenger, and he stated that he really did not like suspects that were older. He thought that the Black Dahlia Avenger was somebody who was perhaps in his 20s, and he was trying to charm Elizabeth Short, somebody who got along well with her and lured her to a vulnerable place because he was just having some type of non-threatening, friendly, superficial charm, and then he put her in a false sense of security and he attacked her. This would be radically different than somebody like Dr. Walter Bayley, 66 years old. Born in 1880. So what do you think? And I know that they have observations about this, and these observations involving profiling are just educated guesses. But one variable that might have been excluded from that profile that was created by Dr. Lee Meller was, could there have been some type of affair going on? Purely speculation, but you've already heard that Dr. Walter Bayley was reportedly having an affair for 5 years, cheating on his wife for 5 years. Was something else going on with Elizabeth Short? And that goes into the category of, I don't know, but I have my suspicions. One person who doesn't seem to get along too well with Larry Harnish is Steve Hodel. In fact, it seems like these two are mostly bitter rivals and enemies in the world, but in the terms of true crime research, not everything is a competition. However, at stevehodel.com, he did do a write-up on Walter Bayley, MD, as a suspect. He says, in 1997, a copy editor for the Los Angeles Times wrote an article on the Black Dahlia murder for the 50th anniversary, and speculated that Dr. Walter Bayley, who lived in the neighborhood near where her body was found, might be connected. According to Larry Harnish, Dr. Bayley separated from his wife and moved out of his residence, which was located 1 block from where the body was posed, just 2 months before the murder. Harnish speculated that the doctor could have been suffering from Alzheimer's disease. That was medically unconfirmed, and if Harnish's diagnosis was accurate, it apparently did not affect Walter Bayley's ability to function mentally, as records show that he officially filed for divorce on January 8th of 1947, the very day that Elizabeth Short's disappearance. The very day before Elizabeth Short's disappearance. She would have gone missing on the 9th. And as I understand, she had gone to San Diego, and she had received a ride from an individual named Red Manley. I have a standalone episode about him as a suspect. She had taken her bags to a bus terminal, and she had actually paid to keep them in storage at the bus terminal, and her plan was not even to stay in Los Angeles. Because she left the bags at the bus terminal, she wanted to go to Chicago, and she had made plans to go to Chicago. And I'm actually citing Eli Frankel for this, and I'll talk about his new book in a second. But then she was apparently intercepted by the Black Dahlia Avenger, and then the rest is ultimately history. And this is another point that was reinforced on Crawl Space. Even though lots of people have different theories, we ultimately know what happened to Elizabeth Short, and we know her fate, her tragic fate. So she would go missing on the 9th, and then it appears that perhaps for 5 days she might have been held captive, or I should say, as many as 5 days. A lot of things have existed with the Black Dahlia case that might indicate that somebody was able to alter the time of death, or to fool the authorities, particularly refrigerating her body before she was disposed near Norton Avenue. So then, I would like to continue, though, with this post from stevehodel.com, which, actually, I do have one more final thing to say, and that is that I wouldn't be convinced that Dr. Walter Bayley was suffering from Alzheimer's. And if he was, he apparently would not have experienced it full on. Maybe he showed signs of Alzheimer's. He would only pass away 1 year after these events would have taken place. But if he is filing for divorce, that usually indicates that he is in somewhat of a sound state of mind, unless he did it in some way by proxy. But let's go back to the article. Dr. Walter Bayley died in January of 1948 of natural causes after a month-long hospitalization in a Veterans Administration hospital in West Los Angeles. Dr. Walter Bayley, of course, was a veteran of the First World War. Again, I mean, this is just something that I think is quite different. Even George Hodel was born in like 1907 or something like that. So Walter Bayley is a considerably older suspect. 2 years after writing the Times article, Larry Harnish was one of several Dahlia theorists interviewed for a television special hosted by ex-LAPD detective and best-selling author Joseph Wambaugh. The program was entitled Case Reopened, The Black Dahlia, and Joseph Wambaugh, in his hour-long Dahlia investigation, interviewed half a dozen theorists and their takes on the whodunit. And they included the summary on his research, and saying that a 67-year-old man with severe Alzheimer's could not have committed this murder. Well, I mean, I wouldn't be convinced that this guy actually had severe Alzheimer's, but I mean, some people think, though, that the Black Dahlia Avenger was not a serial killer. Some people believe that the person who murdered Elizabeth Short did this as a one-off, because there aren't exactly murders that are identical. Steve Odell would be someone who would dispute that completely. He would be stating that he thinks that his father, George Hodel, was the Black Dahlia Avenger and went on to murder dozens of people. But even somebody like me, I cannot give you an exact copy of Elizabeth Short's murder happening somewhere else, where a woman has been cut in half, where she's been given the Glasgow grin, where she has been beaten, mutilated, her breasts have been cut up, she has a cut going from her navel down to her pubic area, and of course having her blood drained. I cannot give you an exact alternate example of that. Oh, well, clearly this is the same type of killer. Lots of killers mutilate women, but based on how personal this is, I don't dismiss Walter Bayley as a suspect. Now, at LarryHarnish.com, he gives his own take on the subject. And this is an article that he has written actually several years ago. This is considerably old. But let's look at what he is sharing about this particular suspect, Dr. Walter Bayley. It turned out that Walter Bayley was very much like the profile by John Douglas. He was desensitized to blood. I mean, that is a point. He's a medical doctor who's been trained in surgery, who is specialized in female health. Yes, he would be desensitized to blood. Comfortable with a knife, although he had a medical degree. And yes, I mean, also, that's another point. He did work with his hands rather than his brain, but he also had a very strong, troubled link to the immediate vicinity of the crime scene. All right, I got you. Medical doctor in the area. He has had at least one major affair. If this guy were like 35 years old, I would be saying we got to push him to the top of the list. No, he's not eliminated for being 66. It's just a reason for doubts. In the mid-1940s, Walter was a prominent member of the Los Angeles medical community. He had been chief of staff at the Los Angeles County Hospital and was an associate professor of surgery at the University of Southern California. He also maintained an active private practice at the Professional Building, 1052 West 6th Street, only 5 blocks from the Biltmore Hotel. He and his wife Ruth had recently bought a home on Norton Avenue, just a block from where Betty's body was found. However, his life had begun to unravel in the last years. By 1946, he was no longer the chief of staff at the county hospital or an associate professor of surgery at USC. Because he was no longer in these positions, there were new financial stresses. I mean, this is a different type of stressor. I was talking about things like a divorce, and when I said the term stressor in the past, it's a life-altering event for the purposes of true crime discussions. A stressor can even be something that's relatively positive, like somebody having a baby can be a stressor. Those were very, very important in the Golden State Killer timelines. But as far as these right here, I mean, we're talking about financial stress. This would be negative stress. He was earning less money, but what really had changed was that a younger woman entered his life, Dr. Alexandra von Patrica. Alexandra was a graduate of the University of Vienna who had come to Los Angeles as a war refugee and had worked as a nurse while she took classes to earn her California medical license. Walter had befriended her, at first as an older established doctor, but later a romantic relationship blossomed. Alexandra, as a partner in his practice in 1946, she entered as a partner in practice in 1946, and Walter walked out on his family and filed for divorce. So this definitely does not seem like the best thing to do. This doesn't seem like to be the most noble thing to do. And this is also something that is definitely unfavorable, but that doesn't mean that he was a murderer. Just because he had an affair with Alexandra Patrica does not mean that he was responsible for the murder of Elizabeth Short. And what do you think, though, about Dr. Walter Bayley as a suspect? You've heard different sides of the issues, and then this is also something that I really want to turn over to you. This guy meets a lot of the points. Yes, absolutely, he wouldn't be grossed out by the sight of blood. Yes, he could have committed the crime. Yes, he could have had the ability to commit these types of operations, and he would also know things about, like, draining blood. He would have known the female body inside and out. He was a medical doctor. He taught surgery at the University of Southern California. There are reasons to suspect him. And I've asked you guys the challenge question once. Do you think that his age should exclude him? I mean, I would love to know your responses. Put them in the comments section down below. And one of the sources that Larry Harnish is extremely critical of is the new book that is coming out from Eli Frankel called Sisters in Death. By the time you listen to this recording, for some of you, it might already be out. This is a book preview, and would like to give a shout out to Right Said Rob, who says, "Hi Ned, you're probably aware, but just in case you're not, Eli Frankel was interviewed by Tim and Lance on the latest Crawl Space podcast. Now, at the time of last week's recording, I was not aware of that, so I watched Eli Frankel's interview. Right Said Rob, thank you for the recommendation. And as you guys see, this is something that is worked into the episode from one of the listeners. If you have anything else, you can drop it in the comments section down below. And I watched the interview, and it started out actually with some interesting stuff. Eli Frankel is going to release this new book called Sisters in Death, which is talking about the possibility of the Black Dahlia Avenger also committing a 1941 murder of a girl in the Midwest who had the name Layla Welsh. Sometime I think he pronounced it Leela Welsh. And she was someone who was mutilated, not exactly in a similar way, but even a portion of her thigh was cut out in a heart-shaped manner. And some other things that Eli Frankel wants to talk about is that he has made a new discovery, and this relates to the disposal of Elizabeth Short's remains when she was placed down in the vacant lot in Southern California. And they actually had to edit that part out of the interview. You could see very clearly that it was edited and cut out, and they had this very awkward jump cut. And he openly said during the interview that he would not want to talk about that publicly, and he wanted people to read his book, Sisters in Death, to hear about this new secret information that he has uncovered related to the disposal of her remains. I admit I am somewhat curious, but I'm not sure if I'm going to bite yet. And to be clear, he states that her body was discovered at 10:50 a.m. on January 15th of 1947. That time is somewhat later than other things that I have read, but he is also somebody who has brought attention to this. Countless individuals have brought attention to this. How did her remains stay there for so long without anybody saying anything? And furthermore, how did nobody see the dump taking place? This is off of a road in Southern California in the Los Angeles area. Shouldn't somebody have seen something? That really is something that is quite bizarre yet remarkable about the case. But her body was discovered by a woman named Betty Bersinger, who was walking with her 3-year-old daughter Annie. They saw what appeared to have been a mannequin, but one thing they really wanted to note was that there were teenagers on their bicycles in the area. Yet these teenagers also did not report or see anything in relation to Elizabeth Short's remains. That is equally bizarre. And one thing that Eli Frankel said during the early part of the interview was that they originally stated that they thought they saw a mannequin in the ground. I mean, even if you get on the Wikipedia page, you might read this statement that when Elizabeth Short's body was first seen from the witnesses, they thought that it was a department store mannequin. And he's like, how on earth could they mistake this for a department store mannequin? I mean, like, they were as close as 10 inches away from her at one point, and I can't verify those particular distances, but I don't think there's anything weird about it. You want to know why? This might be the simplest explanation. Somebody would not be expecting to find a human body in a vacant lot in the Los Angeles area or the New York area or the Chicago area or any place. When you're just walking down the street, the average person does not expect to see human remains discarded like that. So thinking that it's a department store mannequin is not weird to me. I don't think there's anything suspicious about that. I don't think there's anything bizarre about that. And furthermore, her body had been separated, placed 10 to 15 inches apart, the top half of her body and the lower half of her body. And as I've already stated in this episode, the blood had been drained out of her body, so she had an unusual white color to her skin. Yes, they mistook her for a mannequin. And this is upon first glance, not upon close inspection. But do you think that there's anything weird about the Bersingers making that statement that originally they thought they saw a mannequin? I think that that is a purely human response. Nothing bizarre at all. But they were actually interviewed for the book Sisters in Death. And, Eli Frankel is somebody who is definitely not trying to vilify them. He was just asking a question during the interview. And, I mean, the fact that he got in touch with them for his book, I think, is somewhat noteworthy. And during the interview on Crawlspace, I could also tell that he was fairly familiar with media persuasion tactics and how to build up suspense. And he ultimately said during the interview that he had worked on a Charles Manson documentary in the past. So there's going to be a certain degree of showmanship involved with this. But one thing, though, that I thought was very admirable is he's talking about how there was the murder of this individual who is going to be called the Prairie Heiress, and Leela Welch. And she is one of the other possible victims of his suspect, who will be discussed in the book. Perhaps I'll read it for a future Dahlia Thursday. And he's also looking at a connection to the Elizabeth Short murder. But he was asked a direct question. Did you look at other murders in the surrounding areas to see if they could be connected? And he said no. And that's just music to my ears. You should be following the evidence. And if there is a reason to look at another murder in a particular area and think that the Black Dahlia Avenger committed that crime, sure. But I do not like it when people just pull up the encyclopedia of unsolved cases, of the encyclopedia of cold cases, and they start to think, well, maybe my suspect could have done that. Oh, this crime occurred in Southern California. Here's another unsolved crime from Southern California. Maybe it's the same person. Let's see if I can find a way to make the evidence fit. No. Fundamentally wrong. You should not be pre-choosing a suspect and seeing if you can connect them to other murders. So I do give him credit for that particular one there. But I'm definitely going to look more into Sisters in Death in the future, and I want to know who this suspect is. Maybe he has identified the Black Dahlia Avenger. But to the credit of Lance and Tim, I've been listening to them for years, they also seem to propose the idea that the Black Dahlia Avenger could have been a one-off murderer for all of the reasons that I have stated. That there just does not seem to be another murder that is so similar to this set of operations that took place. Now, people can commit different crimes for different reasons, but I'm skeptical. I absolutely think that this is the hallmark of a serial killer. I just cannot give you an example of another crime that is so similar to the Black Dahlia murder where I will tell you with 100% certainty that it was the same killer. So I know that makes it sound like I'm undecided, but as of now, I'm just stating that I think the Black Dahlia murder was a one-off killing. And for a suspect like Walter Bayley, that starts to make a little bit of sense. I mean, it really does. It starts to make a little bit of sense. Somebody who was 66 years old, who had just been divorced, did he just take out his frustrations on Elizabeth Short? If he had Alzheimer's, perhaps not. But if he had a functioning neurocognitive ability, perhaps. But I also wanted to look at some comments that you guys had left on last week's episode, and we have one from Sherry B, who says, Ned Brandt, you do an excellent job with your reasonable and fair approach to finding the truth in these cases. Ah, Ned Brandt, is that a reference to Rembrandt? And I love the Rembrandt painting The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. That's one of my favorites. I wonder where it is. And that's another mystery for a different show. We have a comment from Jacob White. Have you done an H.H. Holmes Ripper Suspect episode? Every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper here on Black Box Online Radio, and H.H. Holmes is one that I did 6 years ago. It was even before Ripper Wednesday had started. It's an old-fashioned black box recording, and I don't even recommend, that anyone would listen to that now. I have not done an H.H. Holmes episode in my new and updated format, so perhaps that's one that could be worked into Ripper Wednesday. I appreciate the feedback. And we have one from Krona Volts, who says, I've enjoyed your Black Dahlia episodes, but here are my thoughts. And this is actually giving all responses to every point that I made last week. But there was something that was discussed in the 7 Myths of the Black Dahlia episode, and this relates to whether or not Elizabeth Short had consumed excrement prior to her murder. And Larry Harnish is very adamant that she did not. John Gilmore is apparently adamant that she did. And what Larry Harnish's explanation is that when Elizabeth Short was bisected, excrement from her intestine went up into the stomach. It went up the duct. And we're going to have a look right here at the comment from from Cronewaltz that says, "Whoever told you that feces is present in the stomach as part of a natural digestive process must have flunked high school biology. According to the LAPD summary, Elizabeth Short's intestine was severed at the duodenum. Feces is produced in the large intestine, not the duodenum, and peristalsis only works in one direction. Even if a truck ran over her midsection, feces in your large intestine wouldn't be forced into your stomach. Of course, if it was a catastrophic mechanical injury caused, the stomach and large intestine might rupture. Feces from the large intestine could enter the stomach, but if both organs were intact, I don't see how this could have happened." And I am going to totally admit something to you guys. I was confused. Yes, I went through high school health class, but I was not paying attention. Not very closely, anyway. But I was like, when you go through the process of digestion, things go from your stomach into the intestines, right? But the excrement is created in the large intestine. At first, things have to go through the small intestine. And as soon as I read that comment from Cronewaltz, it all came back to me. So I do appreciate the correction, and I openly admit that, yes, I had been confused, I was wrong, and I do appreciate the correction. But that's all for me now in this episode. What do you think about Walter Bayley as a suspect? You know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. And of course, you can get me on Facebook, Black Box Ned. If you want to support this channel, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. And if you leave any comments down below, they might be worked into future episodes of BBO War. I'll see you tomorrow for an episode about D.B. Cooper. Until next time.